Hello, good afternoon, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me. We are here at EDUCAUSE 2016 in Anaheim, California, at the Anaheim Convention Center. My name is Lisa Dabbs, and it's great to meet both of you. I am an adjunct professor, an educational consultant, an author, blogger, and a speaker. And I'm here to share with you today something that's very important to me, as I have been sharing all day, different things that caused me to really think about my work as an adjunct professor. I was a principal for 19 years, so I worked in K-12 for a long career, and I brought many of the things that I felt were very important in K-12 to my work as an adjunct professor. But what I find is that it's really tough. Not everyone has that same mindset, a growth mindset, as I like to call it. So one of the things that I want to share really briefly this afternoon with both of you is looking at assessment and how we do that in higher education. I know that in my work, I teach at the University of Laverne. I teach a higher numbered course, a 449 course in math for young children in the child development division. And my students are frequently terrified of math to begin with. And then I have to share with them assessments. I need to let them know that there's a final project and that there's a midterm. So just for a brief few minutes, I want to share with you some ideas about how we might rethink the way that we use assessment in higher ed, okay? And I'm going to show you on this beautiful interactive teaching tool. So how do we use assessment? These are some of my students doing some activities with me in my classroom using hands-on materials. And as I look at assessments and working with them in that area, I have to consistently look at, is it about the data or is it about their learning? So does what I'm doing, teaching and learning, reflect in my assessments? Or is it just a midterm just to give a midterm? And am I really reaching my students who are the 21st century learner, right? So what can we do better? I'm always asking myself that question. So let's see if there's anything we can think about that we can do better. So in the area of assessment, I frequently find that we feel like we're in a mission impossible, right? How are we even going to get our students to think beyond the idea of how many points do I need, Professor Dabbs, to get an A? So I'm going to share with you a few little things that are embedded in my presentation. So how much are students actually improving when we give an assessment piece? We really have the capacity to support them to do better. And I want to give you just a little brief lens into an idea.
We're talking about what the future of assessment is in higher education, the real meaning, the real utility of it. I think we're well past accountability mandates. I hear this language all the time, assessment's not going away, so we should just get better at it. I think it's more than that. I think it's a lot more than that, actually. I think it's actually getting interested in what student learning is, telling institutional stories about how much students, not just benchmark levels of how much students are learning, but how much students are actually improving in their learning is to me a much more helpful thing to begin to ask.
So I love what Ashley Finley said about getting students to really think about their learning, moving beyond the how many points do I need to get an A for my midterm. And if you are so inclined to let us scan your badge, not only will you get a copy of all my presentations, but you'll get a copy of the embed. So if you'd like that, please give it some consideration. So are we actually helping students to improve, right? And then are we telling stories? Are we using the data in a way that's important? You heard Ashley Finley talk about telling stories. So here's one of my students. She's telling a story about a lesson that she wrote and how it worked out when she shared it with her preschool students. So we need to do more thoughtfulness as we do this. We need to remember that the end point, how many points do I need at the end of the midterm, is not the most important. Rubrics and portfolios are a good start, but what I really believe in is the power of storytelling. If you're a professor or an instructor in higher ed and you're not telling stories or modeling that for your students, I really feel that you're falling short. So here's a great article on the power of storytelling in the college classroom. So this professor is talking about how when he begins to tell his own personal story, his students really love it. I know that from my experience, when I start telling my personal story of how I started out as a teacher and a principal and what led me to become an adjunct in higher ed, they're fascinated with the idea. And they're also fascinated with the idea of what I used to do when I was young. So when I'm able to relate to them about what I did and how I felt and how I had to experience higher ed as a 20-year-old, and they're in that same group, they're like, oh my gosh, Professor Jabs used to wait in line to enroll to get classes. So all the stories really help to bring things very current for them. And then it really helps as we look at assessment. So telling stories is really important. And again, modeling it for our students, right? So as we tell those stories, we're getting them engaged. We're getting them much more engaged beyond the assessment tool, even beyond the portfolio. So when we look at the assessment process, what are we doing with it? What are we doing with the midterm? What are we doing with the final? Is it simply something that we're uploading to the LMS that I have to use, which is Blackboard, or is there actually something more we can do? So I really believe that as faculty, we need to engage in the inquiry process with our students. Ashley Finley talks a lot about that. And we need to take a scholarly approach to the research around assessment. So this is another great article about the scholarly approach to teaching, what that means, how we can do it, and the part that I really like is asking this piece right here, asking meaningful questions about student learning and about the activities that we're doing. So for me, that's a much more powerful reflection on how I am assessing myself as a professor, as opposed to, oh, all my kids got a B or a C on my midterm. So really asking meaningful questions that are going to spark their learning, for me, is a better mark of assessment. So lastly, we need to keep asking questions about the assessment process, about what we're doing in our schools, what we're doing in higher ed. So our schools often promote best practices in teaching, but we push the worst practices in assessment. I mean, how many of us have seen our students doing this, right? Cramming at the last minute. And for what? Again, is the endpoint really what it's all about? I say no. So we know what hacking is. We know that we can hack the internet, we can hack an app. Why not also consider hacking assessment? So lastly, I'm going to share with you this really great book. And it's very much focused on K-12. But think of it, is there a way that we as professors, as instructors in higher ed, as those that work to support instructors maybe in higher ed, can we do something about hacking our assessment processes to make it more relevant for our students? So that when they leave us and they get out into the real world, in my case as a child development instructor, all my students are going to become teachers. So am I really modeling the assessment that I want them to be considering when they are with their students? So great book, Hacking Assessment. And you can find it at hacklearning.org. So I want to thank you so much for joining me. It's short and sweet. And if you are on social media, I would love for you to join me on Twitter, because it's my favorite place to be. Are either one of you on social media? You are? Oh, great. Let's make sure to follow each other before we leave. So thank you so much, both of you, for coming. It was my pleasure to be here with both of you today. Thanks again.